In a world where reality and fantasy blur, a young man, once average in every way, is about to undergo a transformation that will shatter the boundaries of his existence. The fruit of evolution begins with a twist of fate, an unexpected summoning to a mysterious magical realm. But this isn't just any ordinary adventure. With no warning, the protagonist embarks on a journey of self-discovery and otherworldly power, all triggered by a single strange fruit. What seemed like an ordinary fruit turns out to hold the key to unimaginable strength, beauty, and more mysteries than he could ever anticipate. As his life is turned upside down, one thing becomes clear: the path ahead is paved with both wonder and danger. What lies beyond the fruit's enticing allure? Only time will tell, and the answers may be more than he's ready for. The cave was dimly lit, its air thick with an almost tangible sense of mystery. The atmosphere clung to Seiichi Higuraji like an invisible shroud, wrapping around him, freezing him in place as he stood in the shadows. His feet felt rooted to the ground, his body refusing to obey his commands to move. A heavy, unspoken tension filled the air, sending his heart into a frantic race. From the depths of the darkness, a figure emerged, a woman of breathtaking beauty, her attire revealing yet sophisticated, seemed at odds with the way she carried herself, an air of elegance and authority that commanded respect. "Marry me," she said, her tone unwavering, as though there was no room for debate or hesitation. Seiichi's breath caught in his throat. His mind reeled, struggling to make sense of the surreal words that echoed in the stillness of the cave. His world spun, and his thoughts scattered like leaves caught in a storm. It felt like a dream, an absurd, illogical moment that defied reality. Yet even as his head swirled with confusion, her words refused to fade, like they had been etched into the very fabric of existence itself. As the strange weight of the situation pressed on him, memories from his past began to resurface, memories he had desperately tried to forget. Seiichi's life had never been easy. In the crowded halls of his high school, he had always felt like an outcast. The laughter and chatter of his classmates echoed around him, but Seiichi remained on the edges of it all, isolated. His overweight frame and disheveled appearance made him an easy target for ridicule. The cruel taunts and mocking laughter from his peers were a constant presence, deepening the wounds of his already fragile self-esteem. He had learned to keep his head down, avoid their piercing gazes, and simply accept his place on the fringes of society. He had convinced himself that this was all he deserved, a life of invisibility, pain, and solitude. But then everything changed. One ordinary day, while Seiichi sat alone in the classroom, a sudden blinding light engulfed the entire school. It was overwhelming, consuming everything in its path. The air was filled with gasps and cries of fear as students scrambled to make sense of the unnatural occurrence. Before panic could fully take hold, a deep, commanding voice echoed through the halls, its tone both authoritative and otherworldly. "You have been summoned to a new world," the voice proclaimed. "Form groups for survival." Chaos erupted. Students clung to each other, forming tight-knit groups in a desperate bid for safety. Seiichi, however, remained alone, his heart sinking as he realized no one was reaching out to him. He stood at the sidelines as he always had. Then the voice spoke again, addressing those left behind. "To those who stand alone, I grant a unique skill, something beyond what the others will receive." In an instant, the world around Seiichi vanished. Moments later, the void shattered and Seiichi found himself standing in the middle of a dense, unfamiliar forest. The air was thick with the earthy scent of foliage, and the sounds of rustling leaves and distant animal calls surrounded him. With his vision blurring, he caught sight of a strange fruit nearby. Despite his desperation, his analytical ability, a skill he had acquired in this new world, identified it as the fruit of evolution. With no hesitation, he devoured it, driven by the need to survive. Seconds after consuming the fruit, a voice spoke to him, activating its effects. Seiichi, however, paid it no mind. His focus was solely on survival. He wandered deeper into the forest, his senses sharpened by the fruit's influence. It wasn't long before he noticed a group of monkeys gathered around more of the fruits. Seizing the opportunity, he waited, biding his time until the monkeys became distracted. Silently, he crept forward and snatched several fruits for himself, along with a few recovery potions that he stashed away for later. Meanwhile, far across the continent, Seiichi's classmates gathered in an open yard. Kazuki, the class representative, took roll call, his brow furrowing as he noticed Seiichi was missing. The group exchanged uneasy glances, but no one voiced their concern. There were more pressing matters at hand: survival in this strange new world. Back in the forest, Seiichi's journey continued. His senses heightened by the fruits, he came across a peculiar mushroom, its vibrant colors drawing his attention. He checked his database for any information but found nothing. Curiosity getting the better of him, he decided to eat it. The effect was immediate. His body seized up and he collapsed, paralyzed. When he regained consciousness, he forced himself to eat another fruit of evolution, despite its bitter taste. Almost instantly, he felt his body surge with newfound strength. But his troubles were far from over. The monkeys returned, their eyes filled with rage as they attacked him. He drank some recovery potions, attempting to fight back, but the monkeys were too strong. One of them struck him, its claws tearing into his flesh. As the monkey prepared to deliver a killing blow, something unexpected happened. The stench from Seiichi's wounds overwhelmed the creature, killing it instantly. The body disintegrated, leaving behind lootable items. Seiichi, though still shaken, collected the items, gaining new skills and a book detailing the clever monkey. His body underwent another painful evolution. The transformation lasted for what felt like hours, but when it was over, Seiichi found himself changed. He was slimmer, more handsome, and exuded an aura of power. Checking his database, he discovered that he had evolved once, out of 10 possible times. 5 months passed, and Seiichi had fully adapted to life in the forest. He had gained dozens of skills, becoming a formidable hunter capable of taking down dangerous creatures like arc wolves with ease. During one of his hunts, he stumbled upon a legendary weapon and learned to wield water magic. Shortly thereafter, he evolved for the 9th time, his strength soaring to new heights. However, his journey was far from over. Moments after his latest evolution, he found himself surrounded by monkeys once again. This time, they were led by their pink boss, Syria, a powerful gorilla. Seiichi checked her level and felt a surge of terror. She was far stronger than anything he had ever faced. Syria wasted no time attacking with swift, precise movements. Seiichi tried to reason with her, but her relentless assault showed no signs of stopping. As the battle raged on, however, Syria began to notice Seiichi's growing strength. Her attacks lessened in intensity, eventually ceasing altogether. To Seiichi's surprise, Syria revealed herself to be a female gorilla, confessing her feelings for him. Seiichi, however, was not ready to accept her advances. He tried to attack her, but Syria effortlessly dodged his blows. She retaliated with her own, her strength overwhelming him. Seiichi summoned a dagger and attempted to use water magic, but the spell backfired, leaving him exposed. Syria delivered a crushing blow, sending him sprawling to the ground. She stood over him, watching with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Outmatched, Seiichi considered using his stench as a last resort. But before he could make his move, Syria interrupted him, lifting him with ease and carrying him away to her lair. Seiichi's first night in Syria's lair was a strange one. He awoke to find that Syria had prepared breakfast for him, an act that confused and intrigued him. At first, his pride held him back from eating, but his hunger eventually won out and he took a bite. To his surprise, the food was delicious. Syria watched him with a pleased expression, her eyes softening as she saw him enjoy her cooking. As the days passed, Seiichi found himself growing accustomed to his new life. Syria's lair, once a place of uncertainty, began to feel like a sanctuary. The bond between them grew stronger, though Seiichi struggled with his feelings for her. Still, he couldn't deny that he had found something in this strange world: strength, purpose, and maybe even love. As he stood in the dimly lit cave facing the stunning woman who had asked him to marry her, he realized that his journey had only just begun. After breakfast, Syria once again brought up the idea of marriage. Seiichi, despite recognizing her kindness and strength, still wasn't ready to marry a gorilla, no matter how remarkable she was. He found himself unable to even consider the possibility, knowing that such a relationship was impossible. Syria didn't press him further this time, but quietly moved off to do the dishes, giving him space. Seiichi, in the meantime, contemplated making a run for it. The thought of escaping the cave and regaining his freedom was tempting. But before he could act on it, Syria returned with some books in hand. She explained that these books contained spells that could help him survive in the dangerous forest. Reluctantly, Seiichi began reading, focusing on the lessons in the books. He learned several useful spells, including a basic wash spell and other magic that might come in handy. Even as he read, Syria didn't let go of her idea. A few hours later, she once again brought up the matter of marriage. This time, Seiichi responded firmly, his decision unwavering. He was not interested in marrying her. He couldn't bring himself to say yes, even though her persistence had become almost endearing. Later in the day, Syria suggested they go fishing together. Seiichi saw it as another opportunity to escape, but his plan was thwarted when a giant spider attacked them. Syria acted swiftly, saving him just in time, and carried him back to the safety of the cave. Back inside, Syria prepared lunch for the two of them. While they ate, Syria explained the significance of the fruit of evolution. She spoke of how someone had recently stolen her supply of it, complaining about the theft. Seiichi, feeling guilty, admitted that he was the one who had taken the fruit. He apologized and asked for her forgiveness. To his surprise, Syria forgave him without hesitation, though she did ask him not to steal again in the future. Despite the apology, the topic of marriage came up once more. Seiichi again responded with a firm no. A few hours later, Syria once again pressed the issue, asking if Seiichi truly hated her. Seiichi reassured her that he didn't hate her. He just couldn't give her what she wanted. Syria smiled softly at his words before leaving the cave, giving him the time he needed to think. Meanwhile, at the same time, Seiichi's classmates were struggling with their own training under their strict commanders. The students complained about their rigorous methods, believing they were already capable of surviving the world on their own. The commanders, determined to ensure their readiness, insisted on continuing the basic combat training before allowing anyone to venture out. Back in the forest, Seiichi finally saw his chance. He managed to escape from Syria's cave, using his speed to stay ahead. As he ran through the wilderness, he stumbled upon a strange cave that appeared to be a dungeon. He hesitated before entering, unsure whether it was a good idea, but knowing he had no other choice with Syria still pursuing him. Inside the cave, he encountered a skeletal ghost. It initially appeared to be a simple, low-level enemy, but Seiichi quickly realized its true strength when it revealed itself to be a level 500 opponent. Panicking, he tried to escape, but the skeleton blocked his path. The sword held was aimed directly at him, and he could do nothing but watch as the blade closed in on him. Just as the sword was about to strike, Syria leaped in front of him, taking the fatal blow meant for him. Syria collapsed onto the ground, blood spilling from the wound. Seiichi rushed to her side, holding her as she gave him a final smile. She thanked him for the moments they had shared, telling him she wished they had more time together before her life faded away. As her breathing slowed and her body went still, Seiichi's grief erupted into rage. He grabbed his dagger and charged at the skeleton, attacking it from every angle, teleporting around the cave to catch it off guard. But the skeleton anticipated his every move and countered each of his attacks effortlessly. In a fit of frustration, Seiichi tried using his water magic, but the skeleton deflected the spells with ease, taunting him. It mocked Seiichi, urging him to accept his inevitable death. Seiichi refused, charging his legs with energy and teleporting directly in front of the skeleton. With a swift motion, he stabbed the skeleton in the chest. The creature, with its final breath, smiled, thanking Seiichi for freeing it from its eternal torment before it disintegrated into nothingness. The golden light that filled the cave suddenly turned Seiichi's attention back to Syria. Her body began to glow as he watched in disbelief. The gorilla form he had known was replaced by that of a beautiful human woman. The transformation was complete. Seiichi, still processing the chaos around him, recovered the book of knowledge from the skeleton's remains. As he read through the book, he learned about Xenos, the skeleton's true identity. Xenos had once been a nobleman, loved by his people. He and his lover were exiled by a jealous emperor and had lived in hiding until their tragic death. As Seiichi and the newly transformed Syria absorbed the sorrow of Xenos' story, they both shed tears for the love that had been lost and the lives that had been stolen. After some time, Seiichi opened a chest within the cave and found clothes for Syria. As she dressed, she looked at him with admiration. Her voice was soft but filled with genuine affection as she praised him for his bravery and strength. She once again urged him to reconsider her proposal, asking him to marry her. Seiichi paused, his mind still processing everything that had just happened: the loss of Syria, her transformation, and the battle with the skeleton. His heart was heavy, uncertain about what the future might hold for them. Syria, watching him carefully, gave him a soft smile and patiently waited, understanding that Seiichi needed time to come to terms with everything. After acquiring the necessary items, Seiichi opened the box and underwent another evolution. His transformation marked his 10th evolution, and once the process was complete, he turned to Syria. He suggested they head to the nearest town, and Syria, ever loyal, promised to follow him wherever he went. Just as they were preparing to leave, a strange figure appeared before them, a floating sheep wearing a suit. The sheep introduced himself as Mr. Sheep, the Dungeon Evolution Guardian. He congratulated Seiichi for defeating the skeleton ghosts, and as a reward, handed him seeds for cultivating the fruit of evolution, as well as a full face mask. After presenting the gifts, Mr. Sheep teleported Seiichi and Syria out of the dungeon. They materialized on a grassy plain near the dungeon. Seiichi, now with Syria by his side, held her hand, and they began their journey toward the nearest town. As they walked, Seiichi explained his plan. He needed to register at the Adventurers Guild to obtain proof of identification. With this, they could move freely within the town without any complications. As they continued their journey, they encountered a blue slime, which to Seiichi's surprise, was at a remarkably high level of 88. Despite the shock, Seiichi defeated the slime using his powerful weapons, and from the defeated creature, he was able to recover several lootable items. Among the items were a pair of boots and 2 cards. Seiichi used the cards to level up, and as he did so, his full-face mask underwent a transformation, turning into a cloak. Along with the change, he discovered a letter that explained his mask's evolution. The letter revealed that as Seiichi was gradually losing his humanity, the mask was evolving to reflect this transformation. After reading the letter, it self-destructed, and Seiichi, along with Syria, continued their journey. Seiichi donned the cloak, and Syria admired her new boots as they walked towards the town. After several hours, they finally arrived at the gates of the town. There, they met a man named Claude, who was surprised to see they didn't have valid identification. To verify their identities, he asked them to place their hands on a special orb that could read their essence. After confirming that their essence was acceptable, Claude allowed them to enter the town, wishing them a safe visit. Once inside the town, Seiichi inquired about the location of the Adventurers Guild. Claude was taken aback by the question and warned them that the guild was a strange place filled with odd characters and behavior. Despite the warnings, Seiichi and Syria made their way to the guild. When they opened the door, they were met with an unusual and unsettling sight. The receptionist and one of the warriors were engaged in a BDSM session. Seiichi, startled and unsure of how to process what he had just witnessed, quickly closed the door. But curiosity got the better of him, and he opened it again, only to confirm that the guild was indeed as bizarre as Claude had described. In an attempt to shield Syria's eyes, Seiichi moved to cover her, but before he could, ahead of the guild, Gusel appeared. Gusel was a muscular man who seemed obsessed with showing off his physique. He shoved Seiichi and Syria into the guild, insisting they register immediately. The receptionist Ace changed into more professional clothing and greeted Seiichi and Syria. She calmly advised them to ignore the strange behavior of the other members and to focus on their own reasons for joining the guild. However, Syria, ever the adventurous one, noticed the others in the guild having fun and suggested they join in as well. Seiichi reluctantly agreed and signed the registration papers. Just as he finished, two oddly dressed men approached them and invited Seiichi to meet their boss in the back of the guild. Seiichi followed them, but it didn't take long for him to realize that their boss was a gay pervert who intended to make inappropriate advances toward him. Horrified, Seiichi fled before the situation could escalate further. The men chased after him, but eventually gave up, leaving him alone. Later that evening, Seiichi returned to the guild and reunited with Syria. Ace and Gusel commended him for being the first person to resist the advances of the three men. Seiichi, still shaken, asked Gusel if anything could be done about their behavior, but Gusel explained that there was nothing he could do to change it. Ace then informed Seiichi and Syria about the next step in their registration process. They needed to undergo a series of tests to determine which missions would be suitable for them. However, before they could proceed, they would need to be supervised by at least a B-rank adventurer. At that moment, an A-rank adventurer named Artoria arrived. She was an imposing figure, and Seiichi found himself momentarily lost in thought, staring at her large chest. Artoria, sensing Seiichi's gaze, tried to dissuade him from accepting her as their test proctor, but Seiichi didn't mind her being their instructor. Artoria explained the details of the upcoming tests, and Seiichi and Syria prepared for the next challenge. Gusel reluctantly allowed Seiichi and Syria to be placed under Artoria's tutelage. Artoria took the duo out to complete their first test, which involved performing various odd jobs around the town. She explained the nature of the tasks with a warm smile, which lifted the spirits of Seiichi and Syria. Their first assignment was to visit an orphanage and take the children out to play. As they were playing, one of the children injured himself. Artoria stepped in to heal a boy, but just as she did, a loose plank fell from above, narrowly missing her. Fortunately, Artoria managed to use her defense spell just in time, protecting both herself and the boy. Once their task at the orphanage was complete, Artoria led Seiichi and Syria to their next quest, demolishing a building. Seiichi, full of confidence, walked straight into the building and touched one of the walls, causing the entire structure to collapse on top of him. Artoria, who had always believed that her presence brought calamity to those around her, panicked and rushed to dig him out from the rubble. To her immense relief, Seiichi emerged from the wreckage unharmed, chuckling at the situation. Artoria scolded him harshly, warning him never to take such risks again. Seiichi thanked her, and they moved on to their next mission. Meanwhile, in the royal capital, the commander responsible for training the high school students expressed his concerns to his subordinate about the kingdom's plan to use the students in their war against demons. He knew that some of them would inevitably die, and he struggled to come to terms with it. Back with Seiichi and Syria, their third test was to walk a wolf dog. The dog immediately began chasing Seiichi all around the town, while Artoria and the dog's owner laughed and chatted, seemingly amused by the chaos. Despite the commotion, Seiichi eventually completed the task and returned to the guild to collect his payment. Before they left, Gusel and Ace asked if Seiichi and Syria had a place to stay. When they admitted they didn't, Artoria kindly invited them to stay at her place until they could find accommodations of their own. For their next test, Artoria instructed them to harvest medicinal herbs and bring them back to her. If they gathered enough, they would pass the test. Seiichi and Syria immediately rushed into the nearby forest to search for the herbs. Artoria watched them go, a smile on her face, but she quickly reminded herself not to get too attached, fearing that her misfortune might affect them. Minutes later, Syria returned with 10 medicinal herbs, passing the test. Seiichi, however, returned with rare mushrooms instead and failed the test. He asked for a second chance and hurried back into the forest to find the correct herbs. While searching, he overheard 3 individuals discussing matters related to the human realms and defying their master, Leia. Seiichi eavesdropped for a moment before revealing himself and asking if they had seen any medicinal herbs. The 3 named Terry, Bosco, and Bell were furious that a human had discovered them. They made a dramatic entrance, trying to display their power, but Seiichi simply ignored them and continued his search. Annoyed by his disregard for their display, the trio summoned a troll to deal with Seiichi. The troll attacked, swinging a massive wooden club, but Seiichi blocked the strike using his Absorb Skill defense spell, shattering the club in the process. Terrified by the turn of events, Terry, Bosco, and Bell fled the scene. Seiichi returned to Artoria empty-handed, begging for her forgiveness. Taking pity on him, Artoria gave him 5 medicinal herbs, passing him so they could move on to the next test. Meanwhile, Terry, Bosco, and Bell were punished by their master, Leia, for acting without her permission. The following day, Seiichi and Syria encountered Claude once again. Claude commended them for being under Artoria's guidance and wished them well. Artoria, having gathered the necessary items for their final test, returned, and the group bid farewell to Claude before heading to the grassy plains. Artoria explained that their final test was a hunting daunting mission. They needed to defeat 10 slimes to pass. However, as soon as the first slime lunged at Seiichi, it was immediately teleported away. Artoria quickly realized that the field was trapped with teleportation spells, and she canceled the test, urging her students to follow her back to the guild. On their way out, Artoria accidentally triggered a teleportation spell, and all 3 of them were transported into an underground tunnel network. Before they could make sense of their new location, Artoria asked Seiichi and Syria why they had followed her into the trap instead of abandoning her. Seiichi and Syria both explained that their bodies had moved on their own, without them consciously deciding to do so. Touched by their response, Artoria gave Seiichi a guide stone, which could be used to locate any of them if they were separated. As they moved forward, Artoria triggered another trap. A solid wall rose up between her and Seiichi and Syria, separating them. Despite their best efforts, neither side could break through the wall or use the guide stone to reunite. While Artoria faced a mummy and struggled to defeat it, Seiichi and Syria encountered a talking chest. The chest urged them to open it, but when they refused, it attacked them instead. Seiichi quickly defeated the chest, and inside, they discovered a book of knowledge. The book explained that the chest had once been a popular item, but with the invention of the item box, it had fallen out of use. Over time, it had developed a will of its own and became hostile. As they continued through the tunnels, Syria noticed that the guide stone was glowing red, indicating that Artoria's life was in danger. Seiichi, growing increasingly worried, began to punch the wall in frustration until it finally gave way. Meanwhile, Artoria, having unknowingly entered the cave of the most feared black dragon demon, found herself face to face with the creature. Despite her powerful Calamity Berserk ability, she was no match for the dragon. The dragon immobilized her and prepared to finish her off with a deadly breath of fire. Resigned to her fate, Artoria awaited her inevitable end. But just as the dragon was about to strike, Seiichi and Syria arrived to save her. Syria stepped in front of Seiichi, using his cloak to block the dragon's fiery breath. Artoria, who had been on the verge of defeat, opened her eyes in shock to see her students there to save her. She was astonished and asked how Seiichi had managed to break through the thick wall to reach her. Seiichi simply replied that he had smashed through the wall and rushed down to the dungeon to rescue her. With the black dragon still in pursuit, Seiichi handed Artoria a recovery potion and placed her under Syria's care. He then prepared himself to face the dragon. Seiichi called out to the dragon, twin swords in hand. The dragon responded with a torrent of fire, but Seiichi dodged it and attacked from above. The dragon blocked his strikes, and Seiichi quickly realized that the dragon was level 500. Trying to make use of his absorb and bind resistance skills, Seiichi found they had no effect. Enraged, the dragon prepared to unleash its ultimate attack, Hell's Inferno. Syria, seeing the flames building, shouted at Seiichi to use the Fall Disaster water spell to counter the attack. This time, Seiichi managed to cast the spell successfully, neutralizing the dragon's fire. Furious, the dragon trapped Seiichi in an intimidation spell, but Seiichi broke free and launched himself at the dragon, activating all of his ultimate skills. With a powerful strike, he sliced the dragon into oblivion. As the dragon vanished, it shed tears, leaving Seiichi to wonder why it had harbored such hatred for humans. The voice assistant began leveling up Seiichi's abilities in tune with his new strength. Syria hugged Seiichi, her relief evident. She asked how they would escape the dungeon, to which Seiichi was unsure. He checked the dragon's item box for clues, touching one of the items and acquiring the black dragon's body parts. After consuming a part, he gained spatial magic. Relieved, Seiichi smiled, finally having a way to get them out. He also found the Black Conqueror's long coat and put it on. The last item in the box was a book of knowledge, which revealed the tragic past of the Black Dragon. The dragon had once been a deity revered by humans, but their greed led them to hunt it for its parts. Saved by the Demon Lord, the dragon was later sealed by humans after summoning heroes to defeat the Demon Lord, imprisoning the dragon in the dungeon for eternity. Overcome with guilt, Seiichi apologized to the dragon for ending its life so carelessly. A letter from Mr. Sheep arrived, informing them that they had failed the test to reunite the Demon Lord with the Black Dragon. Frustrated, Seiichi shouted at Mr. Sheep to leave them alone. Using his newfound spatial magic, Seiichi teleported himself, Artoria, and Syria back to the royal capital. Artoria woke up in Seiichi's arms as they neared the city, asking him to let her go. Seiichi insisted she stay still to avoid reopening her wounds. Artoria revealed her curse. She had been born with a lack of -2 million, a curse that destined her to bring misfortune to anyone who got close to her. Seiichi and Syria reassured her, telling her they valued her presence in their lives. Back at the guild, they discovered that everyone had been searching for them since they went missing. Overwhelmed, Artoria ran away, and Seiichi immediately followed her to ensure she didn't get into trouble. Meanwhile, Terry, Bosco, and Belle were playing blackjack when their master, Lady Leah, arrived with bad news. She informed them of the Black Dragon's defeat and warned them to be cautious of powerful adversaries. Seiichi searched everywhere for Artoria, eventually asking a noble lady for information. The lady urged Seiichi to help Artoria believe in herself again. Seiichi nodded and headed outside the city, eventually finding Artoria sitting near the demolished building, her head in her hands. He called out her name and spoke with her. Artoria asked if she could ever be someone that others could like. Seiichi reassured her, telling her not to worry about her curse and that she would find happiness with friends like him. He gave her the Ring of Happiness, a legendary item that would negate her curse and double her luck. Artoria blushed, thanked him, and ran off, leaving Seiichi confused by her reaction. That night, Artoria returned to the capital, her heart racing whenever she thought of Seiichi. Unbeknownst to her, she was slowly falling in love with him. The next morning, Seiichi sat at breakfast, recalling his conversation with Artoria and concluding that she was avoiding him. Syria advised him not to overthink it and to enjoy the day. After breakfast, Syria left to complete her quests at the orphanage, while Seiichi decided to learn more about the world he had been summoned to. At the guild, Seiichi asked Ace and Gusel for information, but they were of little help. Gusel mentioned rumors about another country summoning heroes from another world to fight a demon lord. Intrigued, Seiichi asked for more details and Gusel directed him to the royal library. Seiichi thanked them and headed there immediately. Meanwhile, in the other country, the king complained to his subordinate about Zakia, the commander who had been reluctant to train the summoned students. Zakia had expressed concerns about sending the young heroes into a war they knew nothing about, but the king found this stance unacceptable. The king demanded that the issue be resolved immediately, as the war against the demons could not wait. The king's right-hand man proposed a sinister plan, suggesting they send the students to the Barbador time. The king considered the idea, his thoughts lingering on the suggestion. He asked how he would convince the students to go. The man revealed a set of enchanted bracelets designed to ensure the students' compliance by forcing them to wear them. Meanwhile, Artoria rushed through the streets, her heart racing as thoughts of Seiichi fled her mind. She couldn't quite understand why he made her feel the way she did. Seiichi, on the other hand, was struggling to find accurate information in the royal library. Every book he opened depicted dragons and demons as nothing more than villains, and he grew frustrated with the repetitive narrative. Feeling disheartened, he turned his attention to a grimoire and began learning new spells. Elsewhere, Syria was having a blast at the orphanage, entertaining the children by transforming back and forth between her human and gorilla forms. Seiichi, feeling hungry after his time at the library, decided to leave and grab a meal. As he wandered through town, he encountered a dog-eared woman selling goods. He purchased a few of her items, but while inspecting his purchase, a sweet aroma caught his attention. Following the scent, he found himself entering a cafe. Inside, he noticed the owner and another man engaged in a private moment, exchanging hushed words. Artoria, wandering aimlessly through the streets, stumbled into an alleyway. There, she met her noble friend Adrian. After enjoying a hot bowl of pasta, Seiichi, sitting at the same cafe, introduced himself to a humble commoner sitting beside him. The commoner introduced the cafe owner, Node, and the three of them discussed the differences between Eastern and Western cultures over tea. Adrian finally explained to Artoria that she was in love with Seiichi. Overwhelmed and unsure of how to deal with this revelation, Artoria struggled to accept the truth. It was her first time experiencing such emotions, and she was torn. Adrian, seeing her distress, offered to help her express her feelings to Seiichi. Meanwhile, Seiichi, still at the cafe, explained to the men about the ring he had given Artoria. Upon hearing that he had placed it on her left ring finger, the men urged him to marry her or face legal consequences. Confused by their sudden insistence, Seiichi admitted that he already had feelings for another woman. The commoner, grinning, suggested that he considered dating both women, joking that the more, the merrier. Seiichi thanked them for their advice and left, his mind now swirling with questions about his own feelings. Later that evening, Seiichi walked through the town, deep in thought. He decided that tomorrow he would give Artoria an answer. In the meantime, he spent the evening with Syria, who kept him company. Just outside the inn, Artoria caught up to him. Without saying a word, she kissed him. Seiichi tried to explain himself, but Artoria stopped him, her voice steady as she confessed her love. She declared that she would stand by his side, no matter what. Seiichi clenched his fist, determined to be honest with her before things went further. Just then, Syria appeared and with a warm smile, gave her blessing for Seiichi to date both of them. Overwhelmed by the moment, Seiichi promised to love both women until death parted them. He kissed Artoria softly and Syria joined them, their bond now solidified and celebrated. A few days after his union with Artoria and Syria, Seiichi returned to the guild to take on more quests. While eating breakfast, Gusel approached, flexing his muscles as he usually did. After the usual display, Gusel asked if Seiichi and Syria had horses, explaining that high-ranking adventurers needed them. He handed Seiichi a map to a well-known stable in town. Seiichi, looking to his wives for help, found that they were busy, so he decided to go alone. At the stable, Seiichi asked the stableman to show him some good horses. The stableman, curious about Seiichi's intentions, inquired if he was planning to join the Royal Cup horse race. Seiichi, trying to avoid giving an answer, simply let the question pass. The stableman showed him several horses, but none of them were impressive. At one point, the stableman even tried to sell him a stuffed toy horse. Just as Seiichi was about to give up, the stableman introduced him to a troublesome donkey. The donkey named Lulan was proud and violent, kicking the stableman when he tried to approach. However, Seiichi, now able to understand donkey language, learned that Lulan only respected strength. After demonstrating his power, Lulan agreed to serve him loyally. Seiichi bought the donkey and decided to take her for a tour around town. They enjoyed dumplings together as they walked. While walking through town, Seiichi overheard an argument between a man named Clay and May, the dog-eared woman he had met earlier. Clay was trying to convince May to enter the cherry painting competition, but May was too shy. Seiichi, eager to help, encouraged her. They made a bet. If Seiichi won the Royal Cup race, May would enter the competition. Clay, sensing Seiichi's determination, also mentioned a giant fish prize for 5th place, which caught Lulan's attention. Determined to win the fish, Seiichi registered for the race. On the day of the race, Seiichi stood with the other competitors on the track. Thousands of spectators lined the stands, including his wives, who cheered him on. The grand prize for the race was a day with the Valkyries, the kingdom's strongest female knights. The announcer explained that violence was allowed during the race, encouraging the adventurers to showcase their skills. When the starting cannon fired, the racers surged forward. Within the first few minutes, 20 competitors were already out of the race. Seiichi and Lulan, however, pressed on, determined to win. As the race began, Seiichi quickly realized that his donkey, Lulan, was struggling to keep up. She hadn't eaten breakfast and could only walk at a slow pace. Knowing he had to act fast, Seiichi rummaged through his inventory, his fingers brushing over the various items until he found the fruit of evolution. Without hesitation, he fed it to Lulan, hoping it would give her the boost she needed. Meanwhile, one of the other adventurers summoned a pack of wolves, their alpha leading the charge to block the path. The adventurer's intentions were clear: eliminate the competition and secure her victory. The wolves snarled, trying to intimidate Lulan and Seiichi, but just as all hope seemed lost, Lulan suddenly burst into action. She ran like a mad donkey, her speed and power seemingly enhanced as she charged toward the finish line. The crowd erupted in cheers, their excitement building with each step she took. While the wolves attempted to intimidate her, Lulan surprised everyone, including Seiichi, by leaping into the air and taking out the entire pack in seconds. Her incredible display of strength and agility left the other competitors in awe. As they neared the finish line, it was clear that none could match her speed. She crossed the line and waited for the others to catch up, but they, overwhelmed by her performance, forfeited, conceding the victory to Seiichi and Lulan. At the end of the race, May and Clay celebrated with the crowd, sharing in the joy of their unexpected win. But Lulan, who had only cared about winning the giant fish prize for 5th place, was disappointed. Seiichi, seeing her deflated, comforted her, thanking her for her amazing victory. His words seemed to soothe Lulan, but then something strange happened. Overcome with emotion, she accidentally transformed into a beautiful young woman, her donkey form vanishing before their eyes. Just at that moment, Artoria and Syria walked in. Upon seeing Lulan, now in her human form, naked and hugging Seiichi, Artoria's face twisted with jealousy. Her voice was sharp and filled with anger as she lashed out at Seiichi, blaming him for the situation. She scolded him for being careless, her emotions running high. Seiichi, caught off guard, tried to explain, but Artoria wasn't having it. Syria, trying to mediate, transformed into her gorilla form, demonstrating that Seiichi wasn't lying. Artoria, still skeptical, took Lulan to a clothing store to get her dressed. While Seiichi waited, his thoughts a mix of confusion and concern. 20 minutes later, Artoria returned, leaving Lulan to Seiichi. Just as they were starting to relax, 2 Valkyries, Claudia and Lorna, suddenly appeared and arrested Seiichi, citing false charges. They led him to the royal training grounds where they planned to meet their leader, Louise. Meanwhile, in the Demon Lord's castle, the captains of the demon army gathered for a meeting with the Demon Lord's daughter, Lucia. She stood before them, her decision firm as she announced her plan to merge with the human kingdom of Wimberg in a bid for peace. Some of the captains, including Leia, opposed the idea, arguing that the recent defeat of the Black Demon Dragon by Seiichi was proof that the human kingdom posed a serious threat. Despite their protests, Lucia remained resolute, confident that her plan would bring about the peace they all desired. Back in Wimberg, Seiichi stood before Louise, the leader of the Valkyries. She was impressed by his reputation, having heard much about him, and decided to challenge him to a sparring match. Seiichi, though reluctant, agreed to the fight. As the match began, he quickly surprised everyone by dodging Louise's attacks with ease, his reflexes and newly acquired skills coming into play. Eventually, Seiichi used his reflex defense and adaptation to defeat Louise, who, humbled by the loss, bowed to him. She pledged her loyalty to Seiichi, recognizing his strength. Later, as Seiichi enjoyed a cup of tea with Claudia, they discussed Louise's past rival, the Black Paladin. The conversation flowed naturally as they exchanged stories, but just as Seiichi was about to respond to Claudia's words, an unexpected disturbance occurred. The king of Wimberg, whom Seiichi recognized as the humble commoner he had met at the cafe, was attacked by an assassin. The commotion reached the training grounds, but Seiichi and Claudia continued their conversation, unaffected by the chaos unfolding around them. Louise, however, interrupted them, her voice filled with gratitude. She thanked Seiichi for helping her rediscover her humanity through their sparring match. Overcome with emotion, she hugged Claudia, expressing her deep appreciation. Just as Seiichi was about to respond to Louise, a loud scream echoed from the royal palace. The sound sent a chill through the air, and Seiichi, Louise, and the Valkyries immediately rushed to investigate, prepared to face whatever danger awaited them. Seiichi and the Valkyries rushed to the king's quarters, a heavy atmosphere thick with urgency. But Seiichi, with his heightened senses and 3D vision, quickly assessed the situation, his eyes narrowing in horror at the king's condition. Ignoring their warnings, he dashed inside, determined to find the assassin responsible. Using his abilities, Seiichi pinpointed the culprit, a small 8-year-old girl named Eligia, who was sprinting toward the exit with incredible speed. Seiichi's database kicked in, revealing that Eligia was enslaved, though he wasn't entirely sure what that meant. His heart sank, but there was no time to dwell on it. He immediately pursued her. Seiichi caught up to Eligia, who, in an attempt to escape, with lightning-fast reflexes, he caught each blade mid-air and pinned her to the wall, holding her in place. Eligia struggled, breaking free and attacked again. But Seiichi, unwilling to let her continue, swiftly knocked her out, the force of his strike rendering her unconscious. The Valkyries arrived shortly after, taking the girl into their custody for interrogation. Seiichi, still processing the situation, asked Louise how they planned to handle Eligia. Louise assured him that they wouldn't resort to torture, but explained that the king had been stabbed with a cursed knife and wouldn't awaken without intervention. Seiichi, ever determined, searched his database for a curse-breaking spell. His eyes lit up as he found a potential solution and asked to be taken to the king's quarters. Upon arrival, Seiichi was stunned to see that the king was none other than Ran, the humble commoner he had met at the cafe. He felt a strange sense of connection to the man who was now lying in an unnatural, death-like slumber. Louise introduced Seiichi to Florio, the leader of the magic division, who was desperate for Seiichi's help. Together, they pleaded with Seiichi, urging him to undo the curse and save the king. Seiichi, though unsure of his own abilities, summoned all of his courage and activated his magic creation spell. He focused, visualizing the curse being lifted and the king's health restored. To everyone's astonishment, his spell worked. The curse was broken, and King Ran slowly awoke, his eyes blinking as he regained consciousness. A wave of relief washed over the room as the room erupted in joyous cheers. The king, grateful for Seiichi's intervention, thanked him and promised a reward. Seiichi, thinking for a moment, made a simple request, a fitting reward in his mind. Meanwhile, in a distant land, Zazakia, the commander of the demon army, pleaded with his wicked king to spare the students summoned to the Barbados Magic Academy. The king, however, had already made up his mind. He intended to use the students as pawns in the war against the demons, showing no mercy. At the academy, Kazuki and her classmates were growing uneasy as they realized how hostile the local students were toward them. Bayama and his goons approached Kazuki, challenging her as the student council president, trying to intimidate her into submission. But Kazuki stood her ground, refusing to be bullied. However, despite her resistance, the summoned students were ostracized, their presence unwanted by the local student body. This hostility was all orchestrated by the king's right-hand man, Helio, whose orders were clear. Back in Wimberg, Seiichi found himself in a relaxed moment as he and King Ran soaked in the warm water of the men's bathhouse. Their conversation turned to their dreams and aspirations, and Seiichi couldn't help but be struck by the king's kind-hearted and almost childlike nature. In another bathhouse, Seiichi's 3 companions, Syria, Artoria, and Lulin, soaked in the water as well. Artoria, still feeling the sting of jealousy, muttered about Seiichi spending so much time with the Valkyries. Syria, ever the voice of reason, urged her to accept the situation, though Artoria's feelings were far from settled. In the dungeons, Lorna had taken a different approach to interrogating Eligia. Dressed in a provocative BDSM outfit, she tried to use the threat of pain to extract information, wielding a whip in an attempt to break the girl's spirit. When physical torture failed, she tried a different tactic: emotional manipulation. She sat down and ate a delicious meal in front of the hungry Eligia, hoping to sway her with the scent of food. Seiichi, horrified by the treatment, couldn't stand by and watch any longer. He stepped in, offering Eligia the food she had been denied. As he fed her, he learned that Eligia was wearing an enslavement collar, a cruel device that would kill her if she defied her master's orders. Seiichi turned to Louise and asked if the collar could be removed. Louise attempted to examine the collar, but when she touched it, Eligia was shocked with pain. The collar seemed to be an unbreakable chain, one that left Eligia with little hope for freedom. Meanwhile, in the Craze Empire, the wicked king was furious upon hearing that the assassination attempt on King Ran had failed. Helio, ever the loyal right-hand man, assured the king that Eligia's enslavement collar would keep her from revealing anything too valuable. His loyalty to the king was being tested, and he began to question the path he had chosen. He recalled a confrontation with the assassin who had attempted to kill King Ran. The man, filled with rage, had explained how his demon wife was murdered by the kingdom's knights, fueling his desire for vengeance. Despite understanding the man's pain, Zakia refused to take his side. The two fought, with Zakia using his wind magic to deflect the assassin's arrows. Though the fight was intense, the assassin thanks Zakia for the challenge before escaping, leaving Zakia alone with his thoughts. As Seiichi and his companions continued to work tirelessly to help Elygia, the tension between the kingdoms of Wimberg and the Craze Empire grew. Seiichi's actions were already beginning to shift the course of events, but the challenges that lay ahead would test his resolve and the strength of the bonds he had forged with his companions. Meanwhile, Seiichi ponders over how to save Elygia from the enslavement collar, and his companions also arrive to watch him. He recalls how he created magic to save Rans and wonders if he can do the same thing again, this time so he initiates his magic creation skill. But the magic circle lessens in size due to the lack of imagination. He notices Elygia in pain and tries to console her by saying that he will free her. His own words remind him of a famous figure from Earth known as Abraham Lincoln, who was deeply related to ending slavery. And due to the high imagination power, the circle grows and a clone of Abraham Lincoln appears. The newly created magic is listed as Abraham Lincoln in the system, and Elygia is freed from the enslavement collar thanks to this new magic. She starts crying after realizing that she is finally free, which makes Seiichi nervous, and Syria hugs Elygia to calm her down. Lulin fully enjoys the emotional scene in front of her while eating the food that Lorna had prepared for herself. No longer bound by the enslavement collar, Olivia begins revealing the information she couldn't speak about before. She starts off by giving an introduction about how beast folks have no proper rights in the Craze Empire and how her mother was sent to a concentration camp while she could only shout her name out helplessly. She explains how the beast folk children were sent to a special facility where they were trained to be killing machines. The survivors became assassins that served only the royal family of the Craze Empire, and she carried out assassination missions for them as she had no choice other than to obey because of the collar. She says that she was only a tool and her hands are stained with the blood of many people. Seiichi holds her hand and tells her that she can start over again, as only the Craze Empire was in the wrong and not her because she was being forced by them. He states how beast folks and humans are the same kind of people that have the same lives. He tells her how she is like a little sister for him, so she should consider him her older brother. Saria suggests that Elygia should stay with them, and Seiichi also supports the idea, but Elygia objects to it because she fears that the Craze Empire will try to kill her, so they might get attacked too if she stays with them. Seiichi declares that he will protect her if that happens and brags a little about how he is also powerful. He asks Louise for permission, and she says that she was hoping to leave Elygia to Seiichi from the start. She reveals that even King Ran wished Elygia to be with Seiichi because he didn't want to punish the small girl, and Elygia is glad that she can join them. On the other side, Helio talks to Craze through a crystal ball, who reveals that they will need to alter their plans a bit because of how Lucia proposed an alliance with the Kingdom of Wimberg. They agree to put their plans into motion while laughing like purebred demons. Meanwhile, Seiichi practices his control over magic under Florio's mentorship, as Florio reminds him of the first time he tried to make a water ball. Syria also learns how to juggle some balls, and Louise arrives with a serious expression on her face. Seiichi asks her what's wrong, so she requests him to protect King Ran during her absence. She explains that Black Paladin, the only other knight on par with her in the kingdom, just sent a report that the monster activity on the borders is increasing, so Louise will have to head there with the Valkyries to help them out. Seiichi states that he is just a normal adventurer and doesn't consider himself up to the job, but Louise reminds him of how he is capable of defeating her, which means that he is not normal. He agrees to protect the king during her absence, and they all go to the gate to see her off along with the Valkyries. Syria questions how long it will take for her to return, so Louise gives them a rough estimation of a month before departing. A few days go by, and Seiichi manages to perfect his control over magic with Florio's help, as they both assume that you will not get the control skill. However, contrary to the expectations, he gains a skill called Endless Hell, which makes him fall into depression. Gus and Ace arrive at that moment, so Seiichi asks them why they came to the palace, so they step aside to reveal an old man. Florio greets the old man as the holy mage, Barnabas, and he is shocked that Seiichi doesn't know who Barnabas is. Florio explains that he is the greatest mage who has mastered many magics and starts fangirling over Barnabas, who replies that flattery is pointless. Florio is shocked that the great mage knows him and says that all the regrets in his life have vanished now, but Seiichi wonders why such a great person came to the palace. They all go to King Ran, and he is shocked to see Barnabas. He walks down the throne hurriedly, calling Barnabas his teacher, and Florio explains to Seiichi that Barnabas is King Ran's former teacher. King Ran orders them to get Barnabas a seat, so Aze takes out one of her kinky gadgets, which Barnabas quite likes. After getting a normal chair, King Ran asks for the reason behind his sudden visit, and Barnabas answers that he came because of his academy. Florio explains to Seiichi that Barnabas is also the principal of the Barbados Academy. Meanwhile, in the academy, Kazuki cuts down a few fake soldiers and thinks about how they're met with unpleasant gazes even when they're walking down the hallway. Back at the palace, King Ran questions if it's about the heroes from the Craze Empire that recently enrolled into the academy, and Barnabas replies how he has faced countless troubles ever since the summoned heroes joined the academy. Seiichi wonders if these heroes are his classmates, and just then, a soldier rushes in with an urgent report. He reveals that a horde of 5,000 boss-leveled monsters is heading towards the capital, which shocks King Ran. Barnabas tells him to calm down as the kingdom has the Valkyrie Order, but King Ran reveals that the Valkyries are at the border. On Louise's end, they reach the border and see the endless number of monsters. Black Paladin says that it's the first time the monsters have gathered up like this so much. He has already killed a number of enemies, but they show no sign of decreasing, and Louise replies that they need to destroy the monsters so badly that they cannot recover. She takes out her blade and orders the start of their attack, jumping down first to lead it. She begins attacking the monsters, and the Valkyrie Order also starts attacking along the Black Paladin. One of the Valkyries reports how a horde of monsters is attacking the capital, which worries Louise. Craze laughs over how he successfully lured Louise and Black Paladin to the border, leaving the capital easy to attack. Back at the capital, the horde approaches the capital, and Syria is very excited to fight, while Lulam is scared out of her wits, but turns out that she was just worried about not being able to eat good food if the capital gets destroyed. She gets hyped up to save her so-loved food, and Lydia is fired up to save her new home. Seiichi tells her not to tire herself out, and she requests him to pat her head after the whole ordeal ends. All the funky characters arrive one by one to defend their capital, with A's even fully costumed up. The monster's close into the capital, so Gus rushes out first, with everyone following him as Seiichi wonders why they're all rushing out. Barnabas stops him from rushing out too, and Gus begins killing the monsters along with A's. All the characters start killing monsters in their own special ways, each one more particular than the other. A Beast King appears, and the cafe owner, Node, steps forward to deal with him. He swiftly kills the Beast King, and King Ran reveals how a Beast King is a piece of cake for the Assassin King, which shocks Seiichi. Another monster falls for Syria, so she transforms only her hand into a gorilla and punches the monster away. Artoria also freezes a monster, which shocks Barnabas as he shouts that it is the highest grade magic, and she cuts the monster down. King Ran, Seiichi, and Barnabas cheer for everyone from atop the wall, while Lulam kicks down all the monsters using her fast legs. Lydia slices all the monsters in her path and also counts the number of monsters that she has killed, with the count already reaching 300. Barnabas decides to take the helm and uses a spell that shoots a barrage of spikes at the monsters. He kills loads of monsters, but it doesn't stop the monsters from trying to advance. He decides to use an even bigger spell that covers quite a big portion of the battlefield, and a tornado emerges from it, which sucks away all the monsters under the spell. Seiichi is shocked by how well Barnabas is controlling his magic, as even such a strong magic is not affecting their allies even a bit. He wonders if he even needs to do anything, and just then, another report arrives that another horde with 10,000 boss-grade monsters is advancing towards the capital from the forest. All the people continue fighting the monsters, but they start getting slowly pushed back due to the large number of monsters. Seiichi thinks about whether he should create a wide-range spell that only targets the monsters. He finally gains an idea on how to create it, so he activates his spell creation magic and envisions a magic that rains down from the sky, delivering judgment to the evildoers. He shouts out to activate the magic, and he falls down to the ground after a while in embarrassment because he thinks that the spell did not activate. The clouds turn dark suddenly, and the statue of God makes the clouds rain down lightning on the enemies. The enemies start dying, and Seiichi notices how the lightning has also hit Gus and Ace. He opens his system to read about the newly created magic and says that the lightning strike only hits harmful things. Seiichi looks at Gus and Ace and realizes that they're disgusting, so that's why the lightning must have hit them. All the monsters get wiped out, and the fighters start celebrating. Meanwhile, Craze is freaking out in his castle as all the monsters he sent were wiped out in an instant, and just then, a lightning strike also hits him, but he doesn't die. Back at the capital, Barnabas is shocked by Seiichi's power, and X from the killed monsters start flowing into Seiichi, even though he doesn't want to level up. The system tells him how he has gained a large amount of skills, so compatible skills will be combined into one stronger skill. Seiichi is against it because he doesn't want any more cheats, but the system doesn't care. King Ran thanks Seiichi and asks him to continue protecting their nation with his strength. He leaves to go check up on the walls of the capital, and before leaving, he suggests that they should take another bath together sometime later. All the girls come running and start asking about the magic he used. Lydia steps forward and reminds Seiichi about the promise he made that he will pet her head after the battle. He fulfills his promise and pets her, but Barnabas decides to be funny, asking him to pet his head too. He returns to being serious and invites Seiichi to join Barbados Academy as a teacher, which leaves him stunned. Back at the academy, all the local students still do not like the heroes, and Kazuki and her friends are still getting unpleasant looks. Back at Barnabas, Seiichi questions why he wants him to be a teacher, so Barnabas explains that the spell Seiichi used to wipe out the monsters was made by him. He adds that the spell did not hit any allies, and it proves that Seiichi's control is even greater than his own. Barnabas passionately asks Seiichi to teach him how he did it, and Seiichi tries to calm him down, so he asks if Seiichi will be coming to the academy or not. Seiichi says that he cannot go yet because he promised to protect the capital until Luis returns, and also because he doesn't want to be away from any of the girls. Barnabas says that Syria can join as a student while Artoria can be a fellow teacher. Lulan can join either as a student or as a martial arts instructor, while Eligia can be Seiichi's maid. That way he won't have to separate with any of them, and all the girls agree to Barnabas' idea. Barnabas asks if they can all leave now after Louise arrives, and Seiichi agrees to it as he feels like his new school will be fun with all of the girls. As there are a few days until Louise arrives, Seiichi decides to spend them by going on separate dates with each of the girls. He takes Lulan to an all-you-can-eat dinner and goes to watch theater with Artoria. On the day of Syria's date, she suggests that they should go shopping with Eligia because she feels bad that Eligia has to stay behind every single time. Seiichi agrees to the idea, and the three of them head out. Eligia also tells them how she likes spending time with them, and later, they watch Eligia play with other kids on the riverside. Seiichi reminds Syria of how far they've come and thanks her for falling in love with a guy like him. He tells her that he loves her too, and Syria starts tearing up due to joy. The kids see this, so they scold Seiichi for making her cry and invite him to come play with them, which Seiichi doesn't say no to. They see a large inflatable air balloon floating in the sky, advertising the art competition being held. Seiichi and his companions arrive to see the competition, whose judge announces himself as Leon Berger. Seiichi finds the burger name familiar, and the first contestant turns out to be Clay, which reminds Seiichi of how Clay's last name is also Berger. He shows his art piece, which is a weird picture that all the girls depict differently. Clay explains how he drew the burning passion he had for painting, but on one is very impressed. All the contestants appear after him, and Mei comes out last. She presents a picture of Seiichi riding the horse and explains how she tried to draw the figure of the guy who gave her courage. She says that the man is her hero, and this makes Seiichi blush up. The judging begins, and after a while, Seiichi goes to Mei and congratulates her on winning the competition. She explains that she got an offer from Leon Berger and will be leaving to study in the capital of Amuria. She asks if she can draw Seiichi again after completing her study, and Seiichi agrees to it. At that point, the Valkyrie Order arrives, and Louise declares her desire to go with Seiichi too. Unfortunately, she cannot because of her duties. Craze finally wakes up after Lester calls for him, and suddenly a fire appears that turns out to be the presence of the Demon Lord. He questions why his resurrection is being delayed, and Craze explains how they're in the process of gathering the despair required to summon him. The Demon Lord expresses his anger and frustration, so Craze bows down in fear. He orders them to create more destruction so he can be summoned again and leaves. Leia tells Craze about how they should target the Barbados Academy, where all the heroes and noble children are gathered. In the academy, Kazuki recalls what happened with Eren a while ago, who was asking them about Seiichi. In the capital, Seiichi and his companions prepare to leave with Barnabas as they are seen off by all the people they had met in Wimberg. On the way to Barbados Academy, a strange figure jumps onto their carriage, calling himself the hero of justice, but Seiichi doesn't mind it. Seiichi agrees to the idea, and the three of them head out. Eligia also tells them how she likes spending time with them, and later, they watch Eligia play with other kids on the riverside. Seiichi reminds Syria of how far they've come and thanks her for falling in love with a guy like him. He tells her if he loves her too, and Syria starts tearing up due to joy. The kids see this, so they scold Seiichi for making her cry and invite him to come play with them, which Seiichi doesn't say no to. They see a large inflatable air balloon floating in the sky, advertising the art competition being held. Seiichi and his companions arrive to see the competition, whose judge announces himself as Leon Berger. Seiichi finds the burger name familiar, and the first contestant turns out to be Clay, which reminds Seiichi of how Clay's last name is also Berger. He shows his art piece, which is a weird picture that all the girls depict differently. Clay explains how he drew the burning passion he had for painting, but on one is very impressed. All the contestants appear after him, and Mei comes out last. She presents a picture of Seiichi riding the horse and explains how she tried to draw the figure of the guy who gave her courage. She says that the man is her hero, and this makes Seiichi blush up. The judging begins, and after a while, Seiichi goes to Mei and congratulates her on winning the competition. She explains that she got an offer from Leon Berger and will be leaving to study in the capital of Amuria. She asks if she can draw Seiichi again, and after completing her study, and Seiichi agrees to it. At that point, the Valkyrie Order arrives, and Louise declares her desire to go with Seiichi too. Unfortunately, she cannot because of her duties. Craze finally wakes up after Lester calls for him, and suddenly a fire appears that turns out to be the presence of the Demon Lord. If you liked what you saw, consider subscribing to the channel and stay tuned for more quality uploads.